welcome to the SPS Digital Learning Hour.
Brought to you by the Digital Learning and Assessment Department.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Mike Thomas.
And I'm Suzanne Sargis.
We're bringing you the latest news in Springfield Public Schools in regards to technology, along with inspiring interviews from teachers who are using technology in the classroom.
We'll also inform you of the latest updates, practices, and news as it pertains to our district. Whether you are new to using technology in the classroom or a seasoned vet, we are here to help.
Coming up next, in case you missed it. In case you missed it, this week's blog is about 10 quick tips on integrating tech into your classroom. This list is not an exhaustive list, but it ranges from using freerice.com, you should check it out to find out what it is, to student collaboration ideas. Check it out and leave us a message in the comment section with your thoughts and ideas.
In case you missed it, many of our teachers have won the Pioneer Valley Excellence in Teaching Award. Check out our Facebook page, which is also posted on our Brightspace landing page, to congratulate all of the recipients.
In case you missed it, Microsoft Outlook has an app for your phone. With our emails now being migrated up to the cloud, we can use the Microsoft Outlook app from the App Store. And you can download it to your phone and get your work emails there. All you need is your email address and your password, and everything will come to your phone for easy access.
In case you missed it, we are looking for some volunteers to test out a couple of Brightspace tools and give us feedback on them. Email us at DLA Support and we will get you more information.
That's it for In Case You Missed It. Coming up next, Hot Takes. Welcome back to our Hot Takes. My hot take this week is from an article on Mindshift. Again, it's a great site to go and learn all the things that are going on around the world in technology and education. And so this article is entitled The Essential Underpinnings of Shifting to Modern Learning. The title really caught me at first. It was like, modern learning? What do you mean by that? Isn't it always modern learning when you're in school and when you're teaching? But the article, I feel like, gets into like how overall we kind of have these shifts in our mind that are happening that we don't even take into account to begin with. And that there's certain things that two researchers, Will Richardson and Bruce Dixon, they have been working on education reform for many years now. And one of the things that they were saying is that our current education model is not preparing students for the future, because a lot of the things that students are doing, computers will be doing in the future, which I think directly leads back to our department and the things that we do, because we spend so much time on technology. My biggest takeaway from this, as we're talking, I'll use some more examples from it, was that we have to make sure that with using technology, that we are not just replacing teachers and replacing instruction and calling that good. I think when I hear that and think of that, I think of like the S on the SAMR model. That's like we're just substituting things. But like for technology to really work in this new modern learning is we have to think about the higher end things, the modification and the redefinition, so that it's not just a tool that we're using, but something that really helps further the students' learning and their educational mindset, their thinking, and their knowledge.
Right. Mike, I love this article that you chose. What jumped out at me in that very first paragraph is the statement that the authors of this article believe that education as a system is ripe for a radical shift away from what's happening now, a radical shift, not to overwhelm people, because I know so many are just getting on board with really using technology in the classroom. But I think this helps in setting their vision that, yes, it's a huge change, but it's what we have to do. It's a radical shift. I think of Star Trek right? Years and years and years ago, people watched Star Trek and it didn't seem possible. That was a whole nother world. That couldn't possibly be everyday life. And now today you walk around and doors are opening automatically. We're communicating in a million different ways than we did 30 years ago. So I think this helps to set that vision that what education is going to be 20 years from now is going to be completely different from what we see today.
Yeah, and I think moving towards more of the students at the center with agency over how they learn, and just that it's about the students and what they're learning, and not just we are teachers, here is our knowledge to you that we have prepared for you to learn, and then you will now have this knowledge. But it's more about students taking ownership over their learning. And so the article does talk about a few things which kind of helps making the how of this shift happen. And the first one is strong leadership. And I loved reading about the superintendent of Albemarle County in Virginia, Pam Warren. She recognized that this is something that will help her students learn and move towards growth in the future. And so she's trying to adopt this idea of yeses and like saying yes to things.
Right. She was surprised initially, though, right, Mike? She had a principal who asked if they could use design thinking to redesign the dining experience in their cafeteria. So she said yes, but did she expect what she ended up seeing?
And no, she didn't, because I think she was expecting, they'll just make a few tables and booths and things. But she actually started seeing pictures from the principal, who was very excited that their middle schoolers were doing this. And that picture, if you go and you look at the article in our notes from the show, you will see that there's the Twitter pictures that he was sending out of the students on 12 to 14 foot high tree houses, basically, with wheels. So not this simple idea like, this is what the students will come up with. But like the students really came up with a way to transform their cafeteria into some place where they want to be. And I think what was really great about it is the principal was super excited because not only were they given the yes to do it, but also the students were engaged. They were passionate about what they were working on. And some of the best students were the ones who struggled the most in the class. And it even made a point that some of the things that they were doing, because they were building these monstrosities, not monstrosities as in monster, but as in huge, they had to do calculating angles, sawing, design. They were doing practical application mathematics. They were doing the Pythagorean theorem. They were doing all these other things that go into account into actually building it. And this is middle schoolers, not high schoolers, but middle schoolers who were given permission and power tools and were allowed to come up with their own idea and then apply it. To me, this makes me think of in high school, every year for homecoming, all the grades built homecoming floats. It was probably one of the few times where we could take ownership over whatever we were doing. Now, our grade, which won 3 out of the 4 years for the floats, we were very proud of that fact. We built these contraptions with no adult help. The only adults that were there were to make sure that we didn't cut ourselves or break any person or any vehicle around us, and to drive the vehicle, of course, because in your younger time, you can't actually drive cars until you're 16, even if it's in a parade. So like we built these great, amazing things that take into account a lot of the things that we had learned in school and like actually applied them.
And I'm glad you brought that up because it reminded me of the fact that this superintendent commented on the fact that one of the many things that she needs to keep in mind is watching out for liability concerns. So with anything new and different, And as exciting as this, there always needs to be somebody who is thinking of liability. But she got past that. She was nervous, but she got past it. Instead of saying, oh, no, you know what? This is not what I expected. We cannot do this. She went and called the right people to make sure that what these students were doing was safe so they could continue to do it. So I love that. And then the other point I wanted to make was the fact that these students were not only engaged, but they were leaders. It says the strongest leaders on the projects and the most creative thinkers and the best workers were the students who struggled the most. So that's what I love about technology in the classroom, that it absolutely, in my opinion, gives students that may not have the best track record in school a chance to really shine.
I think that's one of the great things about the design thinking is that it really puts the onus on the students in what you're going to do and how you're going to apply it. Yes, they needed to know those skills beforehand, and maybe those are the more practical lessons, but design thinking allows students to come up with their own applicable way of doing things. And I think that kind of thinking is happening in the district. I know that there are teachers who think that way and plan that way. And I think that leads on to like another part of what she was talking about in the article is that she doesn't want the greatness, the great things that teachers are doing to be siloed into a classroom. If we are really a learning community, we're actually communicating and working together, not just a bunch of people all doing our own things. I mean, that's why we got Brightspace in the first place, because Brightspace was to help kind of bring us all together with the digital learning, because I know when I first started using more technology in the classroom, I was using Edmodo. I know there's other teachers who use Schoology and Blackboard and whatever other free things that they could get. Now we have something that brings us all together.
I'm glad you said that. That was the first thing I thought of, was how we can use Brightspace to help teachers collaborate with one another. We know academic directors are using them. We know ILSs are using them. And teachers can create that themselves too. Just ask your Brightspace school coordinator in your building to create a course if there's something specific that you might like to do with your peers. It might be an after-school program. It might be a specific project, but know that that is possible. And if you have any questions about how to do that, email DLA support. We're always here to help you, to guide you, to give you suggestions.
One of the other things I like, because I'm like, all right, that's one example of the superintendent being like, yeah, go ahead and do it. I like that she actually gave another example later on in the article talking about how the high school now, they built a recording studio that all students can use no matter their academic status. And it was so popular and the students loved having that space so much that there was one student who just kept learning and learning and learning. And it doesn't say if that student struggled in regular classes or not, but it was something that they were passionate about. To the point where that student is co-teaching a class with a teacher that is an actual credited class.
How awesome is that? It really speaks to the culture that this principal was able to build within that school and that the superintendent is able to build within that district.
And I just think that's having strong leadership, like we have strong leadership in our district. Superintendent Warwick has a great vision for where we're going. And if we can continue to work together in that vision, I think we can go really far. Because I think for visions to work and for it to be sustainable, we need to have people who are here that are both projects and people, and that we're constantly working together.
Right. And I think one challenge that some people may bring up is, how do you assess this different type of learning when the students are in charge or this new phrase that I've read many times now, when students have agency over their learning. How is that measured, and how is that specifically aligned to our state standards? I think we never want to get too far away from that. So again, it's another shift and a different way of thinking of, yes, we want to change the way our students are learning and give them more ownership, but we're still going to tie that back in the end to specific standards. It's just going to be very different than paper and pencil.
And I think a lot of these skills, I would imagine that's for a lot of the students that have gone through like the school district that we're reading about, many of them might have been ones that would fall through the cracks normally. But because they were given these opportunities to take on their own learning, I think it actually helps them in all subjects. And so I think we might not be able to say, all right, here is a test to see how your teamwork is, or your creativity is, or how you work together in a group. Like, there might not be an actual test for it, but it comes through in seeing growth in all areas.
Right. And this is another one of my ideas that I have to figure out and make $1 million, right? But if we can figure out how to assess students, and it may be, like you said, not a test, obviously, but it might be a video critiqued by their peers with a very specific rubric that goes along with it. I know coming up in Brightspace, we have video assignments and UCU that may come into play to help us do that. But once I get that figured out and solved, I will let you know, because I know that's important and it's not easy.
To understand like how all these shifts are happening, another thing that has to happen is communication. And I think it has to be everybody being on the same page. I think we actually do that a lot with common language in this district, which is great because we've got our We Learn, which we know means certain things, which they're totally not coming to my head. I want to be like aligned, the EAR part of it.
Engaged, aligned, and rigorous.
And so like having those terms, because they were totally escaping me, even though we've been staring at them all week, like that common language helps everybody see the vision. And I think the more we're able to communicate with each other, and whether that's through our blog or through this podcast or at staff meetings, from letters from the superintendents, the communications that come out, I think the more that we are clear in presenting our vision and where we want to go and how we want to help students, because that's ultimately why we're doing what we're doing, is to help students. I think having that common language and what it means to be a 21st century learner is important.
Right. Definitely. I really keyed in on the first sentence of this particular part of the article about communication, where it says the biggest misconception about communication is that it occurs. How true is that, Mike? We think we're communicating, we think we're doing a good job, and then we talk to some people and that communication did not get through the way we wanted it to. So we're trying, as Mike said, we've got the podcast, we've got the blog, thanks to Mike, and we constantly try to communicate out to everyone our message and vision of the future. But the other piece that was very eye-opening to me, but it made sense, was that with all the communication that we do, people hear things based on their experiences. So what I say and what is heard is interpreted very differently by different people. And I think that's something we really have to keep in mind in every communication that we send. People hear things differently. So it emphasizes the fact that we have to be crystal clear and we have to communicate again and again and again and again to make sure, just as you do as a teacher in the classroom, you may think that whatever it is that you're teaching is crystal clear. And of course, every student is going to understand it. And then you might have 6 kids raise their hand. I don't get it. I don't get it. And you think to yourself, what do you mean you don't get it? Oh, okay. And you put yourself in their shoes and you try a different way of teaching that lesson, a different way of communicating. And then eventually those students say, oh, now I get it. I was thinking such and such.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was coming back to, from a couple weeks ago, we were talking about using concise language. That is very important when it comes to communicating. And then I was like, well, this is something that even applies down. We could take what we're talking about now and apply it all the way down to the classroom, because all I can think of again are like those memes where you see like the teacher up front and it's like above it says, now everybody go ahead and get started. And it's got like all the minions looking up being like, huh? And so like that's exactly, I think, part of like what you're talking about is like having that communication, because what we're saying might not actually be what is being heard. And whether that comes back to us either not being concise, being too concise, or the people that we're communicating with not having any clue what we were talking about in the first place.
Exactly. Understanding where they're at to begin with, what they know and understand before we start speaking. Another piece in this article, Mike, about communication that I thought was so incredibly important was the fact that in this particular district, This one was in Chicago, by the way. This is a different, completely school district. Oh, thank you. In this district, they really spoke to the parents and the teachers, building leaders, and the community in order to make this change in their district. I think we can't forget about the parents and the community as such an integral part to all of the change in teaching with technology that we're doing. Yeah, I think when that communication stalls out, when it stops, it usually comes back to either someone's at the top is changing, the people in the middle are not able to make sense of it. And it goes back to an earlier point in the article, which is about for change to be sustainable, it has to be something embedded in the entire community. Like for the school with in Virginia, when they were talking about like being more open to new ideas, like that comes from the teachers and that comes from the superintendent to being willing to do that. And it also, I think, comes with like an understanding of how to engage the community around them. Because I can't imagine that project that they were talking about earlier in the article happened just with the teacher and the students. I would have to imagine some parents were probably involved because their students were probably really excited about it and going home talking about it. And then with something in construction, I imagine that if someone's parents were in construction, I'm sure that got brought up and the kids weren't just watching YouTube videos and then turning around and doing it. Right. The fact that the kids were excited and engaged and most likely going home and talking about to their parents is huge. It helps, as this article states, it helps bring along the older generation, which I suppose I include myself in now, brings along the older generation that might think the traditional model worked well enough for them. How many times have we heard people say, what is this new math? What is this new math? Yes. Why do I have to multiply this way? I don't get it. Why does my child have to learn it this way? Now, as I said in a previous podcast, I love math and I taught math and I love the fact that there are multiple ways to do multiplication. To me, it makes perfect sense. I learned one way and yes, I got the right answer, but not everybody thinks the same way. So we need to expose our children to different ways of learning and get them enthusiastic about it so that they go home and get their parents on board. So eventually their parents will say, oh, wow, if I had been taught that way, I would have loved math. Yeah, I think that was the biggest takeaway from this section for me was how do we get students so excited about their learning that they're actually going home and talking about it? I know from doing home visits in prior years that when you go to do a home visit, parents are always like, when Johnny comes home. Johnny is just the name I'm using. It does not refer to any Johnny that I have ever taught. Johnny says that he doesn't know what he learned today. Or I imagine that's a parent with kids in school. What'd you do today? I don't know. And it's like in that same, all kids, I swear, all kids say it the same way. I don't know.
where it's like that just barely a mumble, kind of just breathed out,
right?
Like type of idea. And so like, I think to get everybody on board, the students need to be on board. And I think that goes back to them taking ownership over their learning. The last section talks about having resources. It's great if you've got the leadership and the culture and the communication. Those are part of the ingredients, but you also need resources to do it too. You can't like going into a grocery store and be like, I'm going to make a filet mignon meal. I got $2. I don't know how much filet mignon you're going to get, maybe a half of an ounce, but you're not making that meal. And so you need resources to do that, and you need to know how to use resources well. And it comes back to the idea of we've got all this great technology. If it's just there and we don't know how to use it well, and it's just replacing things, we haven't really changed anything. It's just now there's a screen that you're looking at instead of a teacher you're looking at.
Right. It needs to be more than just the technology. And this ties in too with the fact that some people out there may be nervous that technology is going to replace teachers. You're not just going to have a computer in the classroom and that's going to eliminate the need for a teacher. The technology is used as a tool for student learning. So we're not assessing the fact that a student can use Word or use Excel, but how are they using those two plus everything else to increase their learning?
And so if we come at it with the idea that the technology is going to just be something that we use, we need to make sure that we are integrating it into our course well. I think about like when using Brightspace, like there's ways to use it. There are ways to like, hey, I don't have to print paper anymore because I can just put it up on the course and they can read it there and then they can answer the questions there. And that's good. But those things you were already doing anyways. And you have to ask yourself, was that going to be good teaching to begin with? If I am there giving information and the students are there listening, I feel like I've seen a chart before. It's like 10% of whatever is said is what students hear or take in. And the more that on that chart, like the more the student was involved into their learning, the more they came to accept it. And then one of the things that the author points out is that they think that technology will have a crucial role in modern learning because it's got a powerful potential to connect students to diverse people and experts, to create and to communicate, to learn on their own. It's, again, students, for them to really learn and be 21st century learners, they have to take ownership of their learning.
Right. And when I think of some of the classrooms I've been in where students have been able to do this and really demonstrate that they're in charge of their learning and they're so completely engaged and enthusiastic. They can't wait to talk about it to their teacher or to anyone who might be visiting the classroom. And it just makes me think of young children. Remember when your kids are still young, Mike. Mine's grown, but remember when they're young and they're constantly asking questions. Well, why is the sky blue? Or why does that car go so fast? Or why is that bug crawling on the grass? And it's always why, completely enthusiastic about learning everything they can and how do things work. And it's a matter of keeping that enthusiasm going, not just handing them the answer and not always answering a question with a question, but a lot of times letting them explore and figure out what they think the answer is.
Yeah, I know one of the things that we do with our oldest son, who is 4, is near the end of every month, we'll ask him, what do you want to learn about next month? And then he'll say something. And then my wife and I will do some research to figure out what we can do to teach him and for him to learn. And so this past month, he said, I want to learn more about birds because we have a nice backyard and birds keep flying in and out. And he was very excited about it. And so between the two of us, and he also wanted to learn about plants. So between the two of us, we took out like 40 books from the library on birds and seeds and plants. And every night, that's what we're reading to him. And when I came home yesterday, he was so excited to show me something from one of the books. And so after he screamed, yay, Daddy's home! He came running over with one of these bird books, which is, it's not a kid's book to read. It's more of like a bird identifying book that's written way above his level of understanding. And then he flipped open to a page and said, we saw this bird today. And he was pointing at a cardinal, but he did see a robin too. He just couldn't find it in the book. So he was listing off all the birds that he saw and things that they eat. And he was just so excited about it. And it's like, yes, I could care less about birds, but I'm so glad you're excited. So it's like, that's what it's making me think of when you're talking about how young kids are so wanting to learn.
Right. So despite the fact that, yes, there's information that needs to be taught that not every student is going to be excited about, but whatever the content area, that's our goal, is to keep that enthusiasm going.
And so with this article, they've got these things called white papers, which are, I didn't print off or read them, but my understanding of what white papers are is they're like scholarly papers designed for forward thinking, futuristic thinking. And where a lot of their research, this is a short article, but a lot of it comes from 10 principles for schools of modern learning, where they talk in more detail about all these things that it takes for learning in the future, what it looks like today, and how it's different from how it was. I really suggest that you check this article out and to learn more. I think these are things that are slowly happening that we're not even thinking about.
Exactly. And I don't know if you've noticed, Mike, I know you're a big reader. You're reading every time at lunch, and I'm sure any free moment you have at home, you're reading. And for me, this process of creating the podcast and reading all these different articles, it just reinforces for me all of my enthusiasm for teaching and education. And I think if teachers have the time, it's so worthwhile to check out all of these articles that we've been talking about, because at the end of the day, when you're exhausted after teaching class after class after class, and kids, depending on what grade you teach, kids melting down and assemblies and all of that, I completely understand the exhaustion level. But to take a few minutes to read some of these articles, I think really reignites your passion for teaching. So I hope our listeners do take advantage of the resources that we've been offering. Which I almost started talking about when you were referring to the bird book and your experiences with your son looking at the birds, because my hot take is from Education Week, and the title of the article is, Do Digital Natives Prefer Paper Books to Ebooks? This is something very near and dear to my heart, because I basically collect children's books, children's picture books. And it probably started when my daughter was little, and then continued as I got my master's in education and I taught at the elementary level. I love books. So with the onset of Amazon.com and every other electronic form of children's book, I understood...
Well, let's be real. It's just Amazon.com that we all kind of go to.
True. Very true. So I understood why things were going in that direction, but my heart was sinking deeper and deeper, because in my opinion, you need to have that book in your hand. So to read this article, I was very...
You must have been jumping up and down, doing
was.
cartwheels.
So I think there are many of our listeners that would be very happy to hear that according to the 2015 School Library Journal survey, the librarian surveyed observed that while students use ebooks for school projects and research, many still prefer print books, especially for pleasure reading. What do you think, Mike? Where do you stand on this?
So I know for me personally, I go back and forth between the books that I read, and most of the time it comes down to cost, whether I have the money to buy the book myself or not. Because if I don't, I use the library. Our Western Mass, Central Mass, our whole library system is amazing. Because if my library doesn't have it, I can still request it and get it from another library. which makes me very happy. That's how I can read as much as I do, because if I didn't, I would be stuck with just the books that I have. And a lot of the books that I'm interested in reading, you don't necessarily find at flea markets or book sales, and I don't know about you, but I can't spend $15 to $20 every week on books. There's no way that that's going to get worked into my budget, no matter how hard I try. And so I go back and forth. And so one of the ways, many years back, I got an original Kindle. And so I have a lot of books on that. We probably have, not counting my books that I use for teaching, which I still have all of them. And that's probably close to 1,000 books. But not counting that, we probably have 200 to 300 books in our house at all times that are ours that we own. And like I mentioned before, like we go to the library and use that a lot. So to me, it's a cost thing myself, going back and forth between the two. But I do not want to burst your bubble as much. But the article also points out that entering schools this year are the first ones that are smartphone natives, meaning that they've only known a world where there's been smartphones. And so I really wonder in 10 years, like if this research is done 5-10 years from now, if the numbers would be different.
Right.
And I would think it'd be like more of a 50-50.
It's definitely something that I will follow. And yes, I will still be sad if that's the truth. But I think something that our teachers should keep in the back of their mind is that if it's not in this article, it was another one that was related to this topic, where it's been researched that children's reading comprehension is better when they're reading a book that's held in their hand versus something that's on the computer. So again, as time goes by, yes, definitely it'll be interesting to see if the trend to ebooks goes up and what happens to that reading comprehension. At least in, 2012, ebook sales have steadily dropped. So I'll hang on to that at least for a couple more years.
I also one of the other things I was thinking as you were talking and thinking about the comprehension and how there might be an advantage there. I have a thought, like they don't really talk about it in the article because probably they weren't able to actually research, because this is very much a research article with few thoughts interspliced. But I wonder if there's a difference between like the original Kindle, which is straight for reading, you can't really do anything else on it, to the tablets nowadays, like the iPad, the Amazon Fire, those type of tablets, because on those ones, you can actually go and do different things. And so I know for me, like when I'm reading, because we have a tablet laptop at home, if I'm reading on that, I'll easily distract myself. But like, I'll be reading, I'll be like, oh, I wonder if anyone posted anything new on Facebook. Oh, I wonder what the score of the Red Sox game is. Oh, I wonder who the Patriots drafted. By the way, this is Friday. They didn't draft anybody on Thursday because they didn't have any picks. But like those kind of things, like it's very easy to get distracted because all it is just a swipe of the finger. With a book that you hold, there's less distraction because you're also not holding a cell phone. You're usually not sitting in front of a computer. And so I wonder if that also plays into the comprehension. Because if I were a betting man, I would say that that would be a large part of why there's lower comprehension when it comes to reading. Because the act of reading itself is not different between reading on a screen and reading in a book.
Right. Excellent point. I would agree with that. That makes perfect sense to me, that there's a much greater chance to be distracted by something. Something else, and this is just a pet peeve of mine. I was going to say something about the fact that if you're using an e-reader, you might not have the same illustrations that you would have. Again, I'm just thinking children's books, but I know they have illustrations online. But are they as good as the wonderful illustrations in a well-written children's book? I have to say no, but that's just my personal opinion. But I did notice with this article too that a lot of people toggle, as you were talking about, you toggle between print and digital for different types of, as the article states, information consumption. So it'll be interesting to see. I think there's probably many more instances in a classroom where students would use online sources for informational text. I wonder how many times a teacher uses online sources for pleasure reading. One thing that this article, I think, emphasized was the difference between pleasure reading and informational reading.
And to be honest, where do you learn the most when you read anyways? Is it from what you enjoy reading or what you are begrudgingly reading?
Right. And another point I was going to make too, when you were talking about using an e-reader and the distraction level, think about, and again, especially with younger children, the fact that hopefully most children, when they're reading a book, are reading it with someone. They're reading it with their parent, or their parent is reading it to them. So my question is, how are children being affected today when either they're only using devices to read? Are they getting that social aspect and that memory, that connection to reading? I mean, there's still books that I see that I love, and it's probably because I read it with my mother. Mm-hmm. So lots of questions, but I'll be watching as time marches on.
Yeah, the article does make a point of talking about the whole tactileness of it. And I think part of that tactileness is that time when you snuggle up next to someone that you are reading the book with. Most nights depending on who gets what kid, since we have two, I either get to really enjoy reading or wonder why we're sitting here reading in the first place, depending on which child it is. So the other night, my 4-year-old picked out books. We sat on the couch instead of his bed, and he curled right up into me, and it was all snuggling tight while I was reading Magic School Bus, because thank the Lord for Magic School Bus. It's, because a lot of times he likes to read Paw Patrol books and Cars and all those kind of easy reader, fun story type things. But you're like, all right, what about the educational stuff? What about the fun stuff? What about the Magic School Bus? Recently, he rediscovered his love for Magic School Bus. And so when we've gone to the library, instead of getting Lego books, we've been getting Magic School Bus books. And he'll just snuggle in and what's that mean? What's that mean? What's that mean? Which is great, because then either, depending on how tired we are, we either just tell him, or it's maybe you can look that up with mommy tomorrow and go try to learn more about it.
Yeah, I love it. It's bringing back so many memories, Mike, of all the reading I did with my daughter when she was younger. And I remember sitting with her, and again, with the book in hand, she could stare at an illustration and she would hear me read the story to her, but she would ask 20 questions on one picture, things that I would never even noticed. So my question to the teachers out there is, what types of books do your students read, and what questions do they have? And I also remember, again, with my daughter, she would request a minimum of about 5 books to be read to her before she would go to sleep, up to 10. 15, who knows how many, but of course I would have to cut that down. But I loved the fact that she loved to read and to have me read to her. And a punishment for her was if I said no books tonight. So I feel successful in that.
Yeah, we have our limit of 3 because they're young and it's close to 7 o'clock. So 3 is the cutoff. And then it usually ends up being 3 semi-long books, where I think one of the bird books we had was 80 or 90 pages. I'm like, buddy, we're just going to read a few sections of this book. So why don't we think about what birds we want to read about? And I went through the list and we flipped through the pages to see the pictures. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think right now, I think raising kids up to be readers is going to help combat this fake news stuff that's going on. It's going to combat future illiteracies in different subjects. And I think whether it's paperback books or ebooks, as long as they're reading and understanding what they're reading, I honestly don't care, because that's the more important thing.
Absolutely. It's definitely the more important thing. I won't let go of the social part of it as well, and I only say that because, unfortunately, I remember when I was in the library one time getting my 40 books from my daughter, there was a parent there who, yes, positive, a parent in the library with a young child. However, they weren't engaged in any type of communication with each other. The child was looking at a book, but the parent was on their cell phone. Mm-hmm. So that's my next challenge, is how to connect those two. But I'd be interested in hearing what our listeners have to say. What's your opinion? What do you use in the classroom? What do you envision the future to be? What would you prefer? Let us know.
So that's it for our hot takes. Coming up next, our interview with Wendi DeForest at Liberty Elementary. This week's interview comes from a presenter at our We Learn Technology Symposium back in March. Wendi DeForest is a teacher at Liberty School, and throughout the interview, she discusses her time using Skype and Class Dojo in the classroom. So take a listen. Hopefully it'll be really encouraging to you. I know it was for me.
My name is Wendi DeForest. I'm a second grade teacher at Liberty Elementary School, and today I presented on using Skype in the classroom.
So why did you want to present today?
So I wanted to present today to show teachers how easy it is to integrate virtual field trips and virtual learning into present-day classrooms.
So what is it about virtual field trips that you really like?
So with the student population that we have, they don't always get to get outside of city limits, and where we don't get to have the experiences that we think that we would want to have. So having virtual field trips, they can talk to authors, they can do mystery Skypes to find out about new places, and they can travel to places that they probably will never be able to get to.
So with Skype in the classroom being a newer tool, something new that Microsoft has been offering, what has been your favorite virtual field trip?
So my favorite virtual field trip so far has been to the Greensboro Science Center. They had never done any Skyping before, so we were the first classroom that they got to Skype with, and it was wonderful and amazing to see the exhibits up close and personal, for my students to be able to see things that they normally wouldn't get to see around here. We got to compare and contrast the two different habitats of the penguins, which we learned penguins don't just live in cold weather. Their penguins are from Africa. And they got to compare that with the sharks that they have there. And I think it was great because we were able to connect it with what we're doing in writing right now, and also what we're doing in technology right now.
That sounds pretty awesome. So, how long have you been using Skype in the classroom?
About 6 months.
So, with it being a new tool that you're learning how to use it, on a scale of like 1 to 10 to start with 10 being easy, how do you feel it was to start with? And now that you've used it for some time, like where do you feel you are now?
So I would say in the beginning, it was like a 4. I was very apprehensive as to what if the technology doesn't work? What if we get on something and my kids aren't interested? But after having done a couple of different things, I would say now it's probably about an 8 or a 9. It's very easy. I do a couple of dry runs beforehand, whether I Skype family members or other classrooms just to say, hey, is my stuff working today? Or if I Skype the specific location, like the Science Center, we Skyped the day before to make sure all of the equipment was working on both ends.
So how excited were the students with using the Skype in the classroom?
My kids are elated every time we tell them we're going to Skype. We originally started by Skyping California, using the global read aloud. and we were reading the book, The BFG. So they started to hear things about, the Queen and Hyde Park and all of these places in London. And they wanted to know where these places were and what they were like. So we found another school in London that was interested in doing a mystery Skype. So they had no idea where we were. We knew where they were. And so we Skyped them, and they told us about the places that we were reading about in the book. And then they were asking us questions to try to figure out where in the world we were. And so my kids thought that was absolutely awesome. And every time now we tell them we're going to Skype, they're like, where are we Skyping now? Is it in the United States? Are we Skyping outside the United States? Is it a museum? Is it a science center? Is it a person? Are we calling your dad? So they are really excited about doing Skype in our room.
So in using technology in the classroom, this sounds like, from my point of view, this has been the most successful tool that you've been able to implement. Would you say that's accurate?
As far as the virtual piece of it, yes. I also use Class Dojo in my classroom for behavior management purposes. So that's a totally different, which that has helped tremendously as well.
So can you tell us a little bit about what Class Dojo is for our listeners who might not know?
So Class Dojo can be used as a communication tool between the teacher and the parents. It can be used as a digital portfolio where the students can upload things for themselves to share with their families. It can also be used as a communication tool just to post class stories to let parents know as to what's going on. I use it mostly in support of our PBIS that we're doing in our school to monitor and to reward and to encourage things in the classroom. And my kids, the two technology pieces this year, using Skype and using Class Dojo, my kids are like enthralled in everything that's happening and love to hear the little ding, like, oh, she rewarded us with points. What do we get points for today? And it has changed my classroom environment.
So what would you say to a teacher who is more the tech adverse, the more hands-off, what would you suggest for them to start? Start
basic. When I started with Class Dojo last year, I said, I'm only going to do this to use it for the point system. I don't want to have to worry about handing out tickets. I didn't do anything with Class Story. I didn't use the messaging system with parents. I didn't use any of the student portfolios. And this year I added in a little bit more, and every time something new comes up, I take a look at it and say, yeah, maybe I don't want to do that just yet, but take small steps. Do what you can do. And, you're going to eventually find that you want to do more, and it's going to lead you to actually doing more.
So my experience with Class Dojo, they have, videos that they put together themselves on the growth mindset and how it's okay to fail. Have you used any of those with your students, and what has been their reaction to it?
Yep, I started using those this year. Like I said, last year it was more just to monitor and to reward. This year I started using the growth mindset videos, and I find that when things are happening in the classroom, a lot of my kids will say, well, Mojo doesn't give up. We're not going to give up. And they have a set on empathy as well, and perseverance, and it starts to trickle into their language, and it starts to be visible in what's happening in the classroom as well.
So in the future, do you plan on presenting more at the symposiums, or just coming just for your own knowledge?
Oh, no, I plan to present more. I am a Class Dojo ambassador. So I've been asked by Class Dojo to spread the Class Dojo word and to get more people involved and to get more people on board.
Is there any last words that you'd like to leave for our listeners to encourage them to be using technology more in the classroom?
As I said before, just try it. It can be overwhelming in the beginning, listening to everything and thinking, oh my gosh, I want to do all of this. Start off small. Take something small and say, I'm going to just focus in on this. And eventually you're going to want to do more, and that's going to lead you farther down.
Well, thank you for your time today. And we'll be looking forward to hearing more about Class Dojo and Skyping and any other tools that you've learned along the way.
All right. Thanks.
What a great interview, Mike. I have several takeaways from that. I could listen to that whole interview again. It got me pumped. But for our listeners out there, I hope you got the same takeaways as I did. Number one, how easy it is. When she was talking about Skype, she thought it was very easy. She reiterated the fact that you need to start basic. Do what you can do. Don't be overwhelmed. Start slowly. Remember that she started out with a variety of fears, and by the end, she gave us an 8 or a 9 as to her confidence level. And she knows now that before she uses Skype, she needs to do a dry run the day before or the morning of to make sure that everything's working properly. Just a matter of changing some habits. And now she feels very comfortable with it all.
Yeah, I think the part where she said it a few different times in a few different ways about just take a couple of small steps at a time. Like with Class Dojo, it was, I'm just going to use it for this purpose this year. And then next year she expanded more and now she's an ambassador for it. With Skype in the classroom, it started off with, I don't know if this is going to work, trying it out, and then like really letting it go and going for it. And now, like you had said, she's really comfortable with it. And the fact that it's something that's super engaging to the kids, it goes back to what we were talking about in our articles about the students were taking ownership of their learning. They were like excited about it. It's not just like, yay.
Right. They were very excited. As she put it, the students were enthralled and they couldn't wait for the next time that they would Skype and find out something new. And in addition to that, they actually sat there and said, don't give up. We can't give up. Mm-hmm. How awesome is that?
Yeah, and I like using Class Dojo my last year of teaching. I loved it. There were lots of great tools, and I would be even better at it this year than I was last year. But last year I did use the Mojo videos on the growth mindset. And I did, for one of the 2 classes I taught, it really did affect them. And they would, like her students, like, Mojo won't give up, so we're not going to give up. Like, that really does affect them because they see and the whole purpose behind those videos is to help kids understand what growth mindset is and how their mind works. Because the research that Carol Dweck does, it talks about like once the students understand how their mind works, then it affects everything that they're doing and it helps them persevere through the hard times.
Right. And the other takeaway from this is what a wonderful role model she is for those students. I think with all of the technology that teachers are being asked to try to use on a regular basis, it's important to remember that they are constantly modeling for their students. What do I do if something doesn't work the way I expected it to? What do I do if my lesson completely bombs out? How do I react? What's my state of mind? How do I go forward?
Yeah. So I think if I were a second grade student, I'd be super excited to be in her class. I imagine her students are also. And so I'm looking forward to next year when we have our next symposium to see what she's going to bring, because it'll be very interesting to go and listen to and check out.
Right. She's very enthusiastic, and I can't help but think that she's going to spread that enthusiasm. I'm sure she's already spread it throughout her school. Now she'll have a chance to spread it throughout the district.
All right, as we come to a close, we're coming into our question of the week. Suzanne, what is our question of the week?
My question of the week, and I alluded to it earlier. What types of books do you use in your classroom? What types of reading do your students do in your classroom? Is it online? Are you using ebooks? Are you using ebooks only for informational text? Or are they holding a book in their hand? And what's your opinion on that? Which would you prefer? And how do you envision the future?
So to answer that question, there's a few ways you can do it now. One, you can go to Spreaker.com where the podcast is hosted, and you can leave your answer in the comments there. Or you could email us at dlasupport@springfieldpublicschools.com. We just like to thank UMass today. We are not actually over in the school offices. We went down the block because, again, we're still trying to find the best places to record. And we just want to thank them for allowing us to use their space today. I'm Mike Thomas.
I'm Suzanne Zargis.
And we'll see you next week.